All right, this is Rudy. As part of Rex Russell Dean Lander's 12-page letter that was received on January the 3rd, 2017, he includes a newspaper article write-up on Guantanamo North. I can't figure out exactly what newspaper it is, but I'm sure if we search for it on the internet, we might be able to find out. But I wanted to read it into YouTube, and there's so little written about communications management units that it's just absolutely horrific. So I wanted to, if Russell Dean Landers thinks it's important to include in his letter, then it's important enough for me to take the time and read it. All right, the top says Briefing News 9, and the title of the article is Inside Guantanamo North. Boston bomber Dzhokhar Sarnov has been sent to maximum security federal prison in Terre, Haute, Indiana. What's it like? Who ends up in this prison? Home to federal death row, the maximum security penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana boasts a menacing mix of terrorists, serial killers, white supremacists, and child molesters. Enemy combatant John Walker Lind, the so-called American Taliban, will be one of Sarnov's new neighbors. So too will Abduwali Moose, one of the Somali pirates who took on Captain Richard Phillips. The facility is also home to the execution chamber where Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh met his end in 2001. Sarnov, 21, is currently appealing his sentence to avoid that fate. While he does so, federal death row's newest and youngest member will probably spend at least a decade in a facility so restrictive it's earned the nickname Guantanamo North. Sister Rita Claire Garrido, an activist who has worked with death row inmates, said prisoners are kept isolated in tiny cells all day with almost no human contact. Truthfully, I don't know how they keep their sanity. What's inside Terre Haute? There are two special units. Sarnoff is likely to be placed in the Special Confinement Unit, SCU, built in 1993 to house federal death row inmates. Details on the prison are scarce, but inmates are believed to spend almost every waking minute in their cells, furnished with a bed, shower, desk, toilet, sink, and 13-inch television. Sister Rita reported that inmates went outside for just 5 hours a week, and even then usually only to wander into designated cages to exercise and take a peek at the sky. One inmate found those conditions so hellish, said the ACLU, that he volunteered for execution. Sarnoff also might end up in the Communications Management Unit, a special 50-cell facility for terrorists and other dangerous prisoners. The inmates there are remotely watched and monitored every minute of every day by a team of intelligence officials in West Virginia. That unit and other isolation units were designated to keep terrorists from radicalizing other inmates or slipping dangerous messages to fellow terrorists outside. Are all terrorists sent there? No. Had Sarnoff avoided the death penalty, he could have served a life sentence at the only federal supermax in the country, ADX, Florence in Colorado, nicknamed the Alcatraz of the Rockies. ADX houses some of America's most notorious criminals, including the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski and the shoe bomber Richard Reed. The inmates spend 23 hours a day in concrete cell averaging 12 feet by 7 feet with a 4-inch window at the top to let in some natural light. If the inmates become frustrated and act out, their limbs are strapped to their bed for days at a time in a process known as four-pointing. Notice that it said days, plural, days at a time. In a process known as four-pointing, even former ADX warden Robert Hood has gone on record describing the prison as a clean version of hell. This place is not designed for humanity, said Hood. Has anyone objected? Yes, 11 ADX prisoners have filed a class action lawsuit against the Federal Bureau of Prisons, arguing that prolonged solitary confinement violates the Constitution's 8th Amendment prohibition of cruel and unusual punishment. One inmate, Jack Powers, said he was driven so mad by the lack of human interaction that he bit off his own finger and amputated his own testicle. There are instances of people who literally go insane in solitary confinement, said psychology professor Craig Haney. I've seen it happen. Is this happening just at ADX? Not at all. Solitary was once reserved as a way of punishing and controlling the most disruptive or dangerous prisoners in maximum security lockups. Yet in prisons throughout the country, 80,000 inmates are now held in ADX-style isolation on any given day. Prisoners can be isolated for months on end for the slightest of infractions, such as posting something on social media or talking back to a guard. ACLU campaigner Amy Fettig says an increasing number of prison officials in both red and blue states are beginning to recognize that solitary confinement has been overused and abused in the last 30 years. Does solitary confinement work? Studies show that it does not reduce prison violence, and as a form of rehabilitation, it's a disaster. A 2001 study of Connecticut prisons found that solitary inmates were 50% more likely to be rearrested within the 3 years of release than non-solitary inmates. It was meant to make an inmates improve, said Maine prison warden Rodney Buffard of solitary. The reality is that exactly the opposite happens. That's because long stretches of solitary fill prisoners with rage and make it difficult for them to function in the real world, which they find overwhelming. See box. Now just 21, Sarnoff, who has no hope of ever being released, will likely never leave solitary unless it's to be executed. He's looking at spending potentially at least the next 50 years in isolation, said associate law professor Laura Rovner. It's almost unfathomable. There's another little section of this article, and I think I've read this before, but it doesn't hurt to read it into YouTube again for a second time. Life after solitary confinement. Transitioning back into society after imprisonment isn't easy, and it's even less so after solitary confinement, which research has shown to cause severe psychological damage. Robert King spent a staggering 29 years in solitary in the Louisiana State Penitentiary before being released in 2001 for a 1972 murder he did not commit. For those 3 decades, King spent every day pacing up and down his 9-by-6 foot cell, counting to himself as he did so. Whenever he was caught trying to communicate with other inmates, King would be placed for a month in the cold box of Camp J, going for blocks of 10 days without any interaction, even with the guards, save for a tray being pushed through the small slot in the cell door. I was depressed every day, he says. The sensory deprivation of solitary has permanently damaged King's sight, and he finds it difficult to judge distances after living in such a small space. More than a decade after his release, says King, he still gets confused as to where I am and where I should be. You know, these CMU prisons are absolutely un-American. And I pray that the Lord opens up a path that helps us do away with them. And we've got to tell people about them. I don't think many people even know they exist.